At my backyard BBQ, my son-in-law shoved me into the hot grill in front of 15 guests when I refused to give him my house. My hand hit the burning metal, and everyone stood frozen in silence. My son-in-law quickly said he just stumbled, but then my own daughter looked at my burned hand and said, "Dad, you're being selfish. You're making everything harder than it needs to be." They thought they had broken an old man with no one left to fight for him, until I made one call. "I'm so grateful you're here with me today." Before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, your city, your country? I'd love to know. Welcome to Dad Returns. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and reflection. Names and places are coincidental, but the lesson is real. The morning I turned 72, I sat alone on my back porch with a cup of black coffee and watched the sun come up over the maple tree Margaret planted the year we moved in. The leaves had started turning at the edges, just barely the way August in Portland always teased you before fall came in hard. Nobody called. Nobody came. And for the first time in a long while, that silence did not feel peaceful. It felt like something waiting. I had lived in this house for 31 years. Every board in this porch I had cut and nailed myself. Every window frame, every doorway, I knew which ones settled in winter and which ones swelled in the summer heat. I built this place the same way Margaret and I had built everything else in our lives, slowly, carefully, with our own hands and whatever money we had left at the end of the week. People in this neighborhood thought I was just a retired construction worker. Quiet old Walter in the flannel shirt driving that beat-up Ford pickup, growing tomatoes in the backyard. They were not entirely wrong. I had started out exactly that way, a 23-year-old kid from rural Tennessee with $200 a truck that burned oil and a woman beside me who believed we could build something worth keeping. What they did not know was that Margaret and I had spent 4 decades turning that nothing into a construction materials company that supplied half the commercial projects in the Pacific Northwest. We had laid the groundwork for office towers, hospitals, and government buildings across 3 states. By the time we stepped back from running it day to day, the company was worth more than most people around here would ever guess from looking at my front porch. After Margaret passed 3 years ago, I made a decision. I was going to keep living exactly the way I looked. Same truck, same flannel, same Tuesday mornings at the farmer's market on Burnside. I wanted to see who showed up when there was nothing flashy to show up for. I reached out and touched the arm of the wooden chair beside me, the one Margaret used to sit in every morning with her tea. The cushion had faded from green to a washed-out gray. I had not replaced it. I was not ready to replace it. "Happy birthday to you, old man," I said out loud to no one. The back door creaked open, and Mrs. Carol Hutchins from next door leaned over the fence holding a plate covered in foil. "Walter, I baked you a lemon cake," she called out, her white hair catching the morning light. "Do not tell me you forgot your own birthday again." "I did not forget," I said, standing up to take the plate from her. "I just decided it was not worth a fuss." "Everything is worth a fuss when you get to our age," she said, laughing. "You hear from Emily this morning?" "Not yet," I said. "She will call." Carol gave me the look she always gave me when she thought I was being too easy on the world. She had known Emily since she was 7 years old, back when Emily used to ride her bike down this street until the streetlights came on. "You need company, Walter," Carol said. "Not just cake." "I have got the maple tree," I said. She shook her head, but she was smiling when she walked back inside. I stood there holding the plate and looked out at the yard. Margaret had mapped out every inch of it. The rose bushes along the south fence, the raised vegetable beds she had built herself, the path of flat river stones she had laid out one Saturday afternoon, because she said she wanted something that looked like it had always been there. I walked inside, set the cake on the kitchen counter, and stood in front of the cabinet beside the refrigerator. I opened the bottom drawer and looked at the thick manila envelope sitting in the back underneath a stack of old utility bills. I had not opened it since the day Margaret gave it to me 2 weeks before she died. She had held my hand and told me, "Someday you will need this, Walter. Not for yourself, for the truth." My fingers rested on the edge of the envelope for a long moment. Then I closed the drawer. My cell phone rang. I looked at the screen. Emily. "Hey, sweetheart," I said. "Happy birthday, Dad." Her voice was bright the way it always was when she was in a good mood. "I am so sorry I could not get over there this morning. Derek had an early call." "It is fine," I said. "Carol brought cake." "Oh, good. Dad, listen, Derek was thinking if you are not busy next weekend, we would love to come by and have dinner with you. He has been asking about you." I looked out the kitchen window at the maple tree. "Derek has been asking about me," I repeated. "He has. He feels like we do not see you enough. We want to come spend some time." "Sure," I said. "Come Saturday. I will put something on the grill." "Perfect." There was a pause, and in that pause I heard something shift in her voice, just barely. "He really does care about you, Dad. I just want you to know that." "I know, Emily," I said. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand for a good while. I thought about the last 3 visits Derek had made to this house. Each one had started the same way, a reason that sounded like family and felt like business. I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, rinsed the mug, and set it in the rack to dry. "He really does care about you, Dad." I had been reading people across negotiating tables since before Derek Collins was born. And the one thing I had learned in 40 years of business was this: when someone works that hard to tell you how much they care about you, they are usually getting ready to ask for something. I walked back out to the porch and sat down in my chair. The maple tree threw a long shadow across the lawn. In 2 weeks, those leaves would be burning red and gold. I picked up my coffee mug, remembered it was empty, and held it anyway. Derek had never visited without a reason, and every reason he ever gave me turned out to be something else entirely. They pulled into my driveway at 4 in the afternoon in Derek's new BMW, the third one in 5 years, if I was counting right. I was counting right. I watched from the kitchen window as Derek stepped out first, straightening his jacket before he even looked at the house. That was the thing about Derek Collins. He was always performing, even when he thought no one was watching. Emily came around from the passenger side carrying a bottle of wine and smiling the way she smiled when she wanted everyone to feel comfortable. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's warmth, and somewhere along the way, she had started using both of them to smooth over things that should not have needed smoothing. I opened the front door before they knocked. Emily stepped in and hugged me tight, and for just a second she was 12 years old again, and the world was simple. "You look good." "You say that every time," I said, "because it is true every time." Derek came through the door behind her, hand extended. His grip was the kind that wanted to communicate confidence, firm but brief, releasing before you were ready, like he had somewhere more important to be. "Walter," he said. "Good to see you. Place looks great. Same as it always looks," I said. He smiled at that. Then his eyes moved just for a second, just a quick sweep across the entryway, up toward the ceiling, over to the archway that led into the living room. It was the kind of look a man gives a house when he is trying to decide what it is worth. I had seen contractors do it 100 times. I had done it myself. I stepped back and let them in. We sat at the kitchen table with the wine Emily had brought, and for a while it felt almost normal. Emily talked about her friend's wedding coming up in October, and about a pottery class she had started, and about a documentary she and Derek had watched about national parks. Derek asked me questions about the neighborhood, about whether the property values around here had been going up, about whether I had thought about getting a security system installed. "I have got good locks and good neighbors," I said. "That has always been enough." "Sure, sure," Derek said, nodding. "But you know, a place like this, the lot size alone, the location you are sitting on, something really significant here, Walter. Have you had it appraised recently?" I looked at him over the rim of my coffee cup. "Why would I need an appraisal? Just for your own information," he said, spreading his hands. "Estate planning, that kind of thing. It is smart to know what your assets are worth." "I know what everything I own is worth," I said. Emily touched Derek's arm, a small gesture, and he leaned back and let the subject drop. But he did not let it go. A man like Derek never let anything go, he just changed the angle. After dinner, he asked if he could see the basement. Said he was curious about the foundation, wanted to see what kind of shape the structure was in. I told him it was clean concrete poured in, 1992, never given me a day of trouble. He said he would love to see it anyway. I told him the tour did not extend to the basement. He laughed. Fair enough. We moved to the back porch with decaf, and the evening was cool, and the maple tree rustled in a light breeze, and I thought, this is the part where he says what he actually came here to say. I did not have to wait long. "Walter," Derek said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his voice dropping into what I could only call his boardroom register, serious but friendly, the tone of a man presenting a reasonable solution to a problem you did not know you had. "I want to bring something up, and I hope you will hear me out, because it comes from a place of genuine concern." "Go ahead," I said. "Emily and I have been talking, and we worry about you out here alone. You are not getting any younger, and this is a big property to manage by yourself. And from a legal standpoint, if something were to happen to you, the process of transferring this house could get really complicated. Probate can take years. It can be expensive. It can be a nightmare for the family." Emily nodded beside him, her fingers wrapped around her mug, her eyes on me in a way that looked like concern, but felt like something she had rehearsed. "What we were thinking," Derek continued, "is that it might make sense to add our names to the deed now. Just a precaution. It would not change anything about how you live here. This would still be your home completely, but it would protect the asset and make everything so much simpler down the road." The porch was quiet. A car passed on the street out front. I looked at Derek, at his pressed collar, at the expensive watch catching the last of the daylight, at the careful arrangement of concern on his face. Then I looked at Emily, and my chest tightened in a way I had not expected, because she was looking back at me with those eyes that were so much her mother's, and she genuinely believed what her husband was saying was a kindness. "Eric," I said, setting my mug down on the porch rail. "I appreciate you thinking about it. I do. But this house is mine. I built it. I paid for it. And I plan to decide what happens to it on my own terms and in my own time." Derek's expression stayed pleasant. Too pleasant. "Of course," he said. "Absolutely. I just want you to think about it." "I have thought about it," I said. He smiled, lifted his coffee, and let the subject settle. But his jaw was just a little tight when he smiled, and his eyes had gone somewhere else, somewhere behind the performance. He had not expected that answer. Or maybe he had, and this was always just the opening move. Emily squeezed my hand before they left. "Thank you for dinner, Dad. It was wonderful. Come back anytime," I said, without an agenda. She laughed, thinking I was joking. I stood on the porch and watched Derek's BMW back down the driveway. His reverse lights lit up the darkening street, and then he was gone. I stayed out there for a long time after that, one hand resting on the porch rail Margaret had painted white 12 summers ago. The paint was peeling now. I kept meaning to repaint it and kept finding reasons not to. Derek Collins had just asked me to hand over my home with a smile and a glass of wine. He had done it smoothly, warmly, with his wife sitting right beside him and love in the room to use as cover. He smiled all the way to the door. But I had spent 40 years reading people across negotiating tables, and I knew the difference between a man who was done asking and a man who had just begun. 3 days after Derek and Emily's visit, I climbed into my old Ford pickup at 7 in the morning to make my weekly run to the farmer's market on Burnside. Same route I had driven for 11 years. Down Hawthorne left on 39th, merge onto the overpass, and coast down the long, gentle slope toward the river. I knew every dip in that road, every pothole, every place the pavement buckled in winter. I never made it to the market. I was halfway down the slope when I pressed the brake pedal and felt it go soft under my foot. Not the familiar firm resistance, but something hollow, like pressing your hand into wet sand. I pumped it twice. Nothing caught. The truck kept rolling, picking up speed on the downhill grade, and my hands went tight on the wheel before my brain had finished processing what was happening. "Come on," I said out loud, my voice harder than I felt. "Come on, come on." I did not panic. I had been in tight spots before, on job sites, in negotiations, in the worst moments of Margaret's illness, and the one thing I had learned was that panic costs you the 2 or 3 seconds that matter most. I cut the wheel hard to the right, aimed for the gravel shoulder, and dragged the front tire against the curb to bleed off speed. The truck shuddered, bounced off the concrete lip, and ground to a stop against the base of a chain-link fence. My forehead hit the steering wheel. I sat there with my hands still locked on the wheel, breathing hard, while the engine idled rough, and a woman on the sidewalk ran toward me with her phone already out. "Sir, are you okay, sir? I am calling 911. "I am all right." I called out through the cracked window, though my voice came out thinner than I intended. The right side of my forehead throbbed where it had hit the wheel, and when I reached up to touch it, my fingers came back red. The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes. They got me out of the truck, sat me on the back of the ambulance, pressed gauze to my forehead, while asking me questions I could answer easily: name, date, current president. My costay ached on the right side where the seatbelt had locked hard across my chest. My right wrist had torqued against the wheel and was already swelling at the joint. At Providence Portland Medical Center, a young doctor with wire-rimmed glasses cleaned the cut above my eyebrow and told me I needed 3 stitches and a wrist X-ray. Nothing broken. Soft tissue damage. He said I was lucky. "I know," I told him, and I meant it more than he understood. Emily arrived 45 minutes later, breathless, her coat half-buttoned, like she had thrown it on in a hurry. She pushed through the curtain of the examination bay and stopped when she saw the bandage on my forehead, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dad." Her voice cracked. "Oh, Dad, what happened?" "Brakes went out," I said. "I am fine. 3 stitches and a sore wrist." She crossed the room and hugged me carefully, the way you hug someone when you are afraid of hurting them, and for a moment her arms around me felt exactly like something I had been missing for a very long time. Then Derek called. Emily put him on speaker. "Walter, thank God you are okay," he said, and his voice had that practiced warmth in it, that boardroom concern. "That must have been terrifying." "I managed," I said. "At your age, behind the wheel alone, I hate to think what could have happened," he said. "Emily and I have been worried about exactly this kind of thing." I looked at the ceiling of the examination bay. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. "Have you I said. We have. Honestly, Walter, this might be the moment to have a serious conversation about your living situation. A house that size, driving yourself everywhere, it is a lot for one person. Emily was nodding beside me slowly, her eyes gentle and worried in a way that made my chest hurt worse than the seatbelt had. What kind of conversation did you have in mind? I asked. Well, Derek said, we have actually been thinking that it might make sense for us to move in with you. To help, we could take the main bedroom, you could use the guest room, it is closer to the bathroom anyway, and we would be right there if you needed anything. I looked at Emily. She reached over and took my uninjured hand in both of hers. It makes sense, Dad, she said softly. We just want to take care of you. I kept my voice even. I will think about it. Of course, Derek said. Take your time. We just love you and want you to be safe. After Emily left to get the car, I sat on the edge of the examination table with the paper cover crackling under my weight. My wrist throbbed in its brace. The stitches above my eyebrow pulled tight every time I raised my eyebrows. I thought about Derek's voice on that phone, calm, warm, perfectly timed. And I thought about something else. 3 days ago, while Emily and I had been cleaning up after dinner, Derek had offered to check on something in the garage. Something in my truck. He had said he wanted to see if I had a good flashlight for emergencies. I had been in the kitchen. He had been alone in the garage for nearly 10 minutes. My jaw tightened until I could feel it in my back teeth. I breathed out slow through my nose and made myself stay still. Some things need to be confirmed before they are spoken out loud. And I needed to make one phone call, but not to the police. Not yet. There are moments in a man's life when everything gets very quiet and very clear at the same time. Sitting in that hospital room with 3 stitches above my eye, and Derek's voice still ringing in my ear, I had just had one of those moments. I called Frank Morrison at 7 the next morning. Frank had been fixing my vehicles for 22 years, ever since I pulled into his shop on Southeast Powell with a seized alternator, and he had it running again in under an hour without charging me for the diagnostic. He was the kind of man who said exactly what he saw and never embellished it, which was precisely why I trusted him. Francois, I said when he picked up, I need you to pull my truck in and look at the brake system. All of it, top to bottom. Heard about the accident, he said. Word gets around. You doing okay, Walter? I am doing fine, but I need you to look at those brakes like someone may have touched them. Not like a routine inspection, like an investigation. A pause. How soon can you get it here? Hour, I said. Frank Morrison's shop sat on a wide lot off Southeast Powell, a low concrete building with 2 bay doors and a hand-painted sign that had been fading since the mid-90s. Frank himself was a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s, with grease permanently worked into the creases of his knuckles and a way of moving around an engine that reminded me of surgeons I had watched work. Deliberate, unhurried, certain. He got the truck up on the lift and went to work. I sat on a metal stool near the wall and watched him move through the undercarriage with a drop light, methodical and quiet. 23 minutes passed. I did not rush him. Then he said, Walter, come here. I stood up and walked over. He was crouched beneath the rear axle, the drop light angled up at the brake line running along the passenger side frame rail. He pointed with one thick finger. You see this fitting right here, he said. This is your rear brake line junction, where the main line splits to feed the rear calipers. There is a compression fitting here, and it should be torqued down solid. It has been that way since I last serviced this truck, which was 14 months ago. And now, I asked. Now it is backed off, he said. Not all the way loose, just enough. Maybe a quarter turn, maybe a little more. Enough that the brake fluid seeps out slow under pressure. You would not notice it sitting still. You would not notice it at low speed. But on a downhill grade, when you press hard, the pressure spikes and the fluid bleeds out fast enough that the caliper cannot generate stopping force. My hand gripped the frame of the lift until my knuckles ached. "Frank," I said, "can that happen on its own? Vibration wear anything like that?" He shook his head without hesitation. "Not a chance. This fitting does not work itself loose. It requires a wrench. Somebody put a wrench on this and turned it counterclockwise deliberately until it was just loose enough to cause a problem without being obviously tampered with." He looked up at me, and his face had gone very still. "Walter, somebody tried to hurt you." The bay was quiet, except for the sound of traffic on Powell outside and the tick of the cooling engine. "I need you to photograph everything," I said. My voice was steady, though my chest felt like something heavy had been set down on top of it. "Every angle. Write me a technical report, what you found, what it means, your professional conclusion. Sign and date it." "You going to the police?" "Not yet," I said. "But I need the documentation ready." Frank spent another 30 minutes photographing the fitting from 6 angles and examining the rest of the brake system. He found nothing else disturbed. Whoever had done this had known exactly where to look and exactly how little interference was needed. That told me something important. This was not random. This was specific knowledge applied with a specific goal. I thanked Frank, told him to repair the fitting and have the truck ready by end of day, and walked out into the thin morning sunlight. I stood beside my car in the lot and pulled out my phone. Richard Bennett had been my attorney for 20 years. He had handled every contract, every trust document, every piece of legal architecture Margaret and I had built together. He was 60 years old, methodical to the point of being almost mechanical. And he had a quality I valued above everything else in a lawyer. He listened completely before he spoke a single word. I told him everything. The BMW in the driveway, the questions about the property value, Derek alone in the garage, the accident, Frank's findings this morning. Richard did not speak for a full 10 seconds after I finished. When he did, his voice had changed, not panicked, but sharpened the way a good tool sounds when it is picked up by someone who knows how to use it. "Walter," he said, "I need you to do something that is going to feel completely wrong. Tell me. Do not confront Derek. Do not change anything about how you interact with him or Emily. Go about your life exactly as you have been living it. Be the same man they think they are dealing with." "And what are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going to start pulling Derek Collins apart on paper," Richard said. "Financial records, business filings, liens, court judgments, everything. If he is doing this, there is a reason he is desperate enough to do it. I want to know exactly how desperate before we make a single move." "How long?" I asked. "Give me 2 weeks." The sun had climbed above the roofline of the shop and was cutting hard across the parking lot. I squinted into it, turning my wrist brace over in my other hand. "Richard," I said. "He came into my house and tampered with my vehicle. He could have killed me." "I know that," Richard said, and for just a moment the measured calm in his voice slipped just enough for me to hear the anger underneath it. "That is exactly why we are going to do this right." I put my phone in my pocket and stood there a moment longer. Then I typed a text message to Emily. "Emily, hey sweetheart. Feeling much better today. Tell Derek if he and his friends are free in a few weekends, I would love to have everyone over for a backyard BBQ. My treat." I hit send and watched the message deliver. Richard told me to act normal. I had been acting normal my entire life while building something nobody could see. This time, normal was going to cost Derek Collins everything he thought he had. I found out later, much later after everything had come apart, and the people involved had no more reason to protect their version of events that Derek had spent 3 days on the phone after I sent that text about the barbecue. Not making plans, building a jury. He called Emily's college friends, 2 couples from his office, our next-door neighbors on the far side, and a handful of people from the homeowners association I had served on for 11 years. He told each of them roughly the same story, adjusting the details to match whoever he was talking to. The through line was always the same. Walter was getting on in years. Walter was becoming difficult. Walter refused to accept help from the family that loved him. It was sad, really. They were just worried about him. By the time those 15 people walked through my gate on a Saturday evening in early September, they already had a picture of me in their heads. They were not coming to enjoy a barbecue. They were coming to witness something. I did not know any of that on the morning of the event. What I knew was that the sky was clear and the maples along the back fence had started to turn at their edges, burning orange at the tips the way they always did in early September. And I had a full load of hickory chips soaking in a bucket by the grill the way Margaret always insisted on. She said hickory was the only wood that tasted like it meant it. I never argued with her about that. I never argued with her about most things, and the things I did argue about I was usually wrong on anyway. Derek and Emily arrived 2 hours early to help set up. Emily carried a tray of deviled eggs through the back gate and kissed me on the cheek. And she seemed genuinely happy in the way she used to seem happy at family gatherings before everything got complicated. Derek shook my hand, clapped me once on the shoulder, and immediately began rearranging the folding chairs in a way that made the yard feel like a different person's yard. I watched him move the chairs into a loose semicircle near the center of the lawn, away from the garden beds facing outward toward the grill and the house. Like an audience setup. "You have got a great space out here, Walter," he said, walking the perimeter with his hands in his pockets, looking at the fence line, the garage, the side gate that opened to the driveway. Really underutilized, honestly. With the right vision, you could do so much more with a property like this. "I grow tomatoes," I said. "I think that is plenty." He laughed and kept walking. The guests started arriving at 5. I stood at the grill with my tongs and watched them come through the gate, and I paid close attention to the way they looked at me, not at the food, not at the yard, but at me. A couple of them hugged Emily first before they acknowledged me, which was fine. But there was something in the way a few of them approached, careful, a little too warm, the particular gentleness people extend toward someone they have been told is no longer quite all there. Tom Garrett, who lived 3 streets over, and whose fence I had helped repost after the ice storm 2 winters back, came over and shook my hand, with both of his covering my knuckles the way you do at a funeral. "Walter, you are looking well," he said with so much sincerity in his voice that it almost sounded like relief. "I am glad you are doing okay. Emily mentioned you had a rough patch recently." I said, keeping my voice easy. "I had a fender bender. My wrist is in a brace, not a cast." Of course. He patted my forearm. "Well, you have got good people around you. That is the most important thing at our age." I turned back to the grill and pressed the tongs together once, a slow, deliberate click, and let the smoke rise straight up into the windless evening air. A woman named Patrice, one of Emily's old friends, someone I had met maybe 4 times in 20 years, appeared at my elbow with a glass of white wine and a practiced look of warm concern. "Mr. Hayes?" she said, touching my arm lightly. "I just think it is so wonderful that Emily and Derek are so committed to being here for you. Not everyone has that kind of support. You are a very lucky man." My back molars pressed together. "I am lucky in a number of ways," I said pleasantly. She smiled and drifted back toward the group. I watched her go and understood with absolute clarity what Derek had engineered. He had preloaded every single conversation before it started. Every person at this gathering had arrived already oriented not as guests, but as an audience carefully primed to watch a reasonable old man finally accept the inevitable. At 6:30, Derek clinked a fork against his glass, and the yard went quiet. He stood near the center of the gathering with Emily at his side, relaxed and at ease holding his drink with the casual confidence of a man who believed the room was already his. "I just want to take a second." Derek said, his voice warm and carrying across the yard without effort, "to thank everyone for coming out this evening, and to especially thank Walter for opening up this beautiful property to all of us." He swept his hand across the yard, across the garden beds Margaret had planned on graph paper one winter afternoon, across the back fence I had built with her brother the summer we moved in. "This is a truly special place, and we just want to make sure it is well looked after going forward." "Right, Walter." 15 faces turned toward me, soft and expectant. My hand tightened around the grill handle until the textured grip pressed ridges into my palm. I raised my glass toward the group and kept my smile exactly where it needed to be. "Nothing changes around here," I said, "that I do not personally decide to change." A few people chuckled, reading it as a joke. Derek laughed too. But above that easy smile, his eyes had gone flat and sharp, the way eyes go when a plan has not landed the way it was supposed to. He thought he had built a stage tonight. He was right about that much. What he had miscalculated was who was actually running the show. Derek raised his glass like a man who already owned the house he was standing in. I kept my eyes on the fire beneath the grill and felt the heat steady against my face. The night was still very young. It happened at 8:47 in the evening. I know the exact time because I had just glanced down at Margaret's watch on my wrist. A slim silver Belova she had given me on our 30th anniversary, with the words still running engraved on the caseback when I heard Derek's footsteps crossing the grass behind me, with a particular kind of purpose that I had learned to recognize over years of watching men approach a negotiating table when they had decided the time for patience was over. The grill had burned down to a steady bed of coals. Most of the food was gone. The guests had loosened up with 2 hours of wine and good weather, and the conversation had spread across the yard in the comfortable overlapping way it does when people have forgotten they came with any particular agenda. Derek touched my elbow. "Walter, can we step over here for a second?" He steered me toward the gap between the grill and the back fence, just far enough from the nearest cluster of guests to seem private, close enough that they could hear if things got loud. "That was not an accident. I am going to be straight with you," he said, dropping his voice to a confidential register. "Tonight is a good moment. Everyone who matters is here. They all care about you. And I think if you just took the step of signing the transfer paperwork tonight, right now, I have got it in the house, it would be such a relief for everyone. For Emily. For you." I looked at him steadily. "Derek, my answer has not changed since the last time you asked." His jaw shifted. "Walter, you are being unreasonable. We are trying to help you." "You are trying to take my house," I said. "There is a difference." His face reddened, a deep flush rising from his collar, and I watched the polished consultant exterior crack along its seams. He stepped closer, and his voice climbed out of its careful register. "You know what your problem is," he said loud enough now that the nearest guests had started to turn their heads. "You are a stubborn old man who cannot admit when he needs help. You are sitting on $1.5 million worth of property that you cannot even maintain, and you are too proud and too selfish to let the people who love you do something useful with it." "Derek." Emily's voice came sharp from behind him. "Lower your voice." But Derek's hand shot out and grabbed my shoulder hard, the fingers digging in, and shoved. I was not a young man. I was 72 years old with a healing wrist and a body that did not absorb surprises the way it once had. The force of it caught me mid-step and sent me stumbling backward, and my hand went out instinctively to catch myself on the nearest solid thing, which was the side rail of the grill. The metal was 400 degrees. The sound it made, the brief, terrible hiss of skin meeting superheated steel, cut through every conversation in the yard. My palm screamed with a white-hot pain that shot straight up my arm to my shoulder, and I wrenched my hand back and pressed it against my chest, breathing through my teeth, my eyes watering against my will. 15 people stared. Derek stood 2 feet away, his chest heaving, his finger pointed at me like an accusation. He stumbled, he said to the yard, loud and fast. You all saw it, he just stumbled backward. The pain in my hand was extraordinary, a deep, searing burn that pulsed with every heartbeat. I straightened up, pressed my burned palm flat against the front of my shirt, and looked at the faces around me. Some were horrified, some were uncertain. Some were already doing what people do when they witness something that makes them uncomfortable, looking away, finding somewhere else to direct their attention. Emily pushed past Derek and came toward me. And for one desperate, aching second, I thought she was coming to help me. I thought she was going to take my hand and ask if I was okay and be my daughter. She stopped 2 feet away and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not concern, not guilt, but a kind of frustrated impatience, like I was a problem that kept refusing to resolve itself. Dad. Her voice was tight and controlled. You always do this. You make everything so much harder than it has to be. She glanced at the guests around us, then back at me, and her voice dropped just slightly. You are being selfish. You know that you have always been selfish. My burned hand throbbed against my shirt. My eyes stung, but not from the smoke. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, at the set of her jaw, and the way she was holding herself, braced and defensive, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not break. Shift. Like a bearing that had worn past its tolerance and finally seated somewhere new, somewhere permanent. I reached down with my good hand, picked up the long-handled grill tongs from the side table and set them down gently on the folded dish towel beside the cooler. I pressed my burned palm back against my shirt. I turned and walked toward the back door of my house without looking back at Derek, without looking back at the 15 people standing in my yard, and without looking back at Emily. My boots were loud on the back porch steps. The screen door swung shut behind me with a soft bang, and then I was inside in the quiet kitchen with the smell of charcoal fading behind the glass. I walked through my own front door for what I knew might be the last time I walked through it, as just a quiet old man. What I was walking toward on the other side of that evening, none of them had any idea. But I did. The last car pulled out of my driveway at 9:23. I know because I was standing at the kitchen sink, running cold water over my burned palm, watching the taillights disappear through the window above the faucet. Nobody knocked on the back door to check on me before they left. Not one of the 15 people who had stood in my yard 2 hours ago eating my food and nodding along to Derek's little speech had thought to come inside and ask how my hand was doing. I found the first aid kit under the bathroom sink and cleaned the burn the way it needed to be cleaned: cool water, loose gauze, no tight wrapping. The blistered skin needed air and time. Some injuries you cannot rush. You just have to let them work through their own process. I sat down at the kitchen table with the gauze loosely taped across my palm and thought about Margaret. Not the way I usually thought about her, the soft, aching version that came to me in the early mornings when the house was quiet. This was different. This was the version of Margaret who had sat across from me at this exact table after every difficult business decision we had ever made together. The one who would press her lips together and look at me with those steady gray eyes until I told her the truth about what I was actually thinking. "He tampered with my brakes, Margaret," I said. "And tonight he put my hand on a hot grill in front of 15 witnesses and called it a stumble." The kitchen did not answer me, but I felt her in the room the way I always felt her, not as a presence, exactly, more as a standard, a calibration. The thing I measured myself against when I was trying to decide whether I was reacting from fear or from principle. She had told me once near the end, her voice rough from the medication, but her grip on my hand still firm. "Walter, promise me you will not let them mistake your silence for weakness." "I am not being silent anymore," I told the empty chair across from me. "I just needed to know for certain." I pushed back from the table, walked through the laundry room, and opened the door to the garage. The truck sat there in the half-dark, the repair Frank had done on the brake fitting holding clean and solid. I pulled the chain for the overhead light and walked slowly around the vehicle, one hand trailing along the fender, the way you walk around a thing when you are trying to read it rather than use it. I stopped at the driver's side front wheel well and crouched down, which cost me considerably more than it once had, and looked at the undercarriage with the flashlight from the workbench. Frank's work was clean. The fitting was torqued back down solid. But the scratch marks around it, the slight silvering of the metal where a wrench had bitten into the fitting housing, were exactly where Frank had pointed them out to me, a quarter turn. That was all it had taken. Someone had crouched in this very spot in my garage while I was 30 feet away in the kitchen, making coffee, and turned a wrench a quarter of the way around. My burned hand throbbed against the gauze. I stood back up slower than I wanted to and pressed my good hand flat against the cold hood of the truck. Derek had been in this garage for 10 minutes the evening he came with Emily for dinner. He had come back here alone, claiming he was looking for a flashlight. He had a mechanical background. He had mentioned it once, years ago, something about working on cars in college to pay his tuition. He had walked into my home and tried to kill me, and then he had sat across my dinner table and asked me to hand him the deed. I walked back into the kitchen, sat down, picked up my phone, and called Richard Bennett at 11 o'clock at night. Richard answered on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting the call. "Walter," he said. "He put my hand on a hot grill tonight," I said, "in front of 15 people. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Are you hurt?" "I have had worse," I said. "Richard, I need you to hear what I am about to tell you, and I need you to not argue with me about it." "Go ahead." "I am not going to the police yet. I am not going to the hospital to document the burn for a report. I am not going to call Emily and have a confrontation. I am going to do exactly what you told me to do 2 weeks ago. I am going to act completely normal." My voice had dropped to something I barely recognized, something low and very, very level. "And then I am going to let Derek Collins walk himself into the worst mistake of his life." Richard was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Then, I will be at your house at 7 Monday morning." 6:58, I said. "I make coffee at 6:45. He almost laughed. 6:58. He agreed. After I hung up, I sat for a long while in the chair at the end of the kitchen table, the same chair I had sat in for 31 years, the one that faced the back window and the dark shape of the maple tree beyond it. My burned hand rested on top of the table gauze, white against the wood grain. For the first time since the screen door had swung shut behind me tonight, something in my chest loosened just slightly. Not relief exactly. More like the feeling of a plan that has been forming quietly for weeks, finally clicking into its final shape. I had spent 40 years building things quietly without ever needing anyone to watch me do it. What I was about to build next would be the most important thing I had ever constructed, and Derek Collins would not see a single brick being laid. Richard Bennett arrived at 6:58 Monday morning, 2 minutes before he said he would. In 20 years, he had never once been late to anything, and I had always taken that as a statement of character rather than just punctuality. He came through the front door carrying his worn leather briefcase and declined the coffee I held out toward him, which told me more about the seriousness of the morning than anything he could have said. "Sit down, Walter," he said, setting the briefcase on the kitchen table and snapping it open before he had even pulled out his chair. Richard Bennett was 60 years old, silver-haired, and built like a man who had spent his career making large institutions feel small. He wore the same style of dark suit he had worn every time I had ever seen him professionally, and he had a way of arranging documents on a table that made them look like evidence even before you knew what they contained. He pulled out 3 items and set them in a row in front of me. The first was Frank Morrison's technical report, 2 pages typed, signed, and dated with Frank's notarized certification attached. The brake line fitting, the quarter turn, the professional conclusion, deliberate tampering. The second was a thick folder of printed documents held together with a binder clip. "Derek Collins," Richard said, tapping the folder. "I started pulling his records the morning after you called me about the garage. What I found took me about 48 hours to fully understand, because the way he had structured things was designed to be confusing. But once you cut through the structure, it is actually very simple." He opened the folder and laid the first page in front of me. It was a credit report, not the kind you get from a consumer website, but a full commercial credit analysis, the kind that showed business entities, liens, judgments, and outstanding obligations in precise columns. "His personal credit score is 412, Richard said. "That is not a typo." I leaned forward and looked at the number. 412. In my years in business, I had seen companies survive on thin margins and creative financing, but a personal credit score that low meant one thing. The damage had been happening for a long time, and there had been no recovery. "How bad is the business side?" I asked. Richard turned to the next page. "His firm has 2 active breach of contract suits filed against it in Multnomah County. One from a client alleging mismanagement of investment funds, one from a former business partner over unpaid profit distributions. He has a personal guarantee on a commercial loan that went into default 8 months ago. The bank has not yet moved to collect, but they will." He paused. "He also has a second mortgage on the penthouse downtown that Emily does not appear to know about. He took it out 14 months ago." My jaw tightened. I kept my eyes on the documents and breathed steadily through my nose. "He needs cash," I said. "He needs a significant amount of cash very quickly," Richard said. "And the only asset in his immediate orbit that could generate that cash is your house." The third item on the table was a single sheet of plain white paper with a handwritten list on it, 8 items numbered in Richard's precise small print. A sequence of steps. "Before I walk you through what I am proposing," Richard said, "I need to show you something else." He looked at me with the particular expression he used when he was about to say something that required me to hold still and receive it without reacting. "I have reason to believe Derek is going to try to have you declared legally incompetent," Richard said. "He would need a medical professional to evaluate you and file a report with the county court recommending guardianship. Under Oregon law, if such a petition is granted, the appointed guardian which Derek would petition to be through, Emily would have legal authority to manage your assets, including real property." The burn on my palm pulsed under the fresh bandage I had put on this morning. I held my hand flat on the table and kept my voice even. "He is going to send a doctor to my house," I said. "Almost certainly." which is why I need you to do something that is going to require everything you have got. Richard leaned forward. I need you to be exactly what he thinks you already are. Confused, tired, a little forgetful. Give him no resistance and every reason to believe he is winning. And while you are doing that, Richard said, I am going to have a very detailed conversation with a man named David Morgan at First Pacific Bank. And I am going to finish building the legal architecture that will make sure that when Derek finally makes his move, he lands on ground we have already prepared. I reached across the table then to the cabinet behind me and opened the bottom drawer. I took out the thick manila envelope I had last touched on my birthday morning, the one Margaret had pressed into my hands 2 weeks before she died and told me I would need someday. Not for myself, for the truth. I set it on the table in front of Richard. His eyes moved to it, then back to my face. She prepared it herself, I said. She told me there would come a time when I needed documentation that could not be argued with. She was thorough about it. She always was. Richard reached out and opened the envelope carefully, the way you would open something that has been kept a long time. He spent 3 minutes reading through the top documents, his expression steady and unreadable the way it always was when he was processing something significant. Then he set the papers down, straightened them precisely against the edge of the table, and looked at me with something in his eyes I had not seen there before in 20 years of working together. It was not surprise exactly. It was the look of a man who has just understood the full dimensions of what he is working with. Walter, he said quietly, I believe we have everything we need. I picked up my coffee, which had gone slightly cool, and held it in my good hand. Then let us make sure we use it right, I said. The manila envelope sat between us on the kitchen table, and outside the window, the maple tree was burning gold in the early morning light. Margaret had planted that tree the first autumn we moved in. She had said she wanted something that would still be growing long after both of us were gone. She had been right about that too. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment right now and tell me, do you think Walter should fight back or let it go? Type fight if you think he should stand his ground, or type let go if you think walking away is the wiser move. I read every single one of your comments, and I want to know where you stand before this story takes a turn you will not see coming. And before we continue, I want to be upfront with you. Parts of what you are about to hear have been shaped for storytelling. Not everything in life wraps up this neatly, and not every family wound heals this cleanly. If that is not the kind of story you are here for tonight, no judgment, you can step away now. But if you are staying, hold on tight. Because what Walter did next changed everything. Starting the very next morning after Richard left, I became someone I had never been in my entire 72 years on this earth. I became helpless. It did not come naturally. I had spent 4 decades being the man who showed up early, stayed late, and solved problems that other people had given up on. Pretending to be confused and worn out, felt the way I imagined an actor feels the first time they play a villain. You know, it is a performance, but you have to commit to it so completely that even you start to believe the character for stretches at a time. I called Emily on a Tuesday morning 3 days after Richard's visit. I let my voice go soft and a little thin at the edges, the way voices go when someone has not been sleeping well. Sweetheart, I said, I need to tell you something, and I do not want you to worry. Dad! Her voice sharpened immediately. What is wrong? My hand has been bothering me more than I let on, I said. And I have been having a little trouble sleeping. I keep waking up at 3 in the morning, and I cannot remember why I got up. I paused, let out a long, slow breath. I think it is all catching up to me. The accident, the barbecue, all of it. She made a small sound halfway between a sigh and a sob. "Oh, Dad, I am so sorry. I should have called sooner." "You have your own life," I said. "I just wanted you to know." "Derek and I are going to come by this weekend," she said, her voice firm now, the way it got when she had made a decision. No arguments. "All right," I said. I made sure my voice sounded like relief. I set the phone down and then looked at the kitchen ceiling. That had cost me something, letting my voice go that way. Even performed weakness leaves a mark on a man who has spent his whole life standing up straight. The supermarket trip 2 days later was Richard's suggestion, and it was almost elegant in its simplicity. Derek had mentioned to Emily that he sometimes stopped at the Safeway on Belmont on Wednesday mornings before his first call. Emily had mentioned this to me without realizing she had handed me a stage. I drove to that Safeway at 9:45 Wednesday morning and pushed a cart slowly through the cereal aisle. When I heard Derek's voice 2 sections over, I found a spot in front of the oatmeal display and stood there. I picked up one canister, read the label, set it down. Picked up another, read the same label, set it down. Picked up the first one again. I heard the cartwheels stop behind me. "Walter." Derek's voice had that careful, measured concern in it that he used when he thought he was watching something significant. "Hey, what are you doing all the way over here?" I turned around, slowly blinked at him like I was working to place him. "Derek, I did not know you shopped here." "I do sometimes." He was watching me with those flat, calculating eyes. "Are you doing okay? You look a little tired." "Oh, I came for oatmeal," I said, holding up the canister I had set down twice already. "I keep forgetting which one Margaret liked." Something moved across his face, just a flicker, a fraction of a second, and it turned my stomach slightly to see it. It was satisfaction. He covered it quickly with an expression of warm concern, but I had seen it, and I filed it away carefully. "She liked the steel-cut kind," he said. "The blue canister." "That is right," I said, reaching for the blue one with a slightly trembling hand. "Thank you, Derek." I heard the faint click of his phone camera as I turned back to the shelf. He thought he was being subtle. He was not. By the following Saturday, when Derek and Emily came for what Emily called a check-in visit, I had refined the performance considerably. I let them sit in the living room for a full hour, and during that hour I told the same story about my old foreman Eddie twice, once at the beginning and once near the end, without acknowledging the repetition. Emily exchanged a glance with Derek over my head, quick and worried, and Derek reached over and patted Emily's knee with the particular tenderness of a man who is working very hard to look like a devoted husband. "Chiklitra," Derek said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Have you thought any more about what we discussed, about the property management arrangement?" "What arrangement was that?" I asked. He blinked. Then he collected himself and smiled gently. "Just about us being more involved in helping you manage the property, having some legal authority to step in if you ever needed us to handle something." "Ah." I nodded slowly, as if the idea was settling into place for the first time. "That might not be a bad idea. Let me think on it." Derek's posture changed. His shoulders dropped about 1/4 of an inch. He thought he had just crossed a threshold. "Of course," he said warmly. "Whenever you are ready, Walter. No rush." After they left, I walked next door and found Carol Hutchins trimming her rose bushes along the shared fence line. She straightened up when she saw me and pulled off one garden glove. "Those two left in a hurry," she said. "They had places to be," I said. She studied me for a moment, with the sharp, unhurried attention of a woman who had been watching this neighborhood for 30 years. Walter, I meant to tell you, I had a security camera company come install one of those new systems last month. Covers my driveway and the side yard. She pointed toward the fence that ran along the edge of my backyard. It picks up a fair amount of your property, too, I noticed. Thought you should know. I looked at the camera mounted under her eave, angled down and outward. It had a clear line of sight to the section of my yard where the barbecue grill stood. I appreciate you telling me, Carol, I said. She pulled her glove back on and went back to her roses. Derek thought he was watching me fall apart. He had no idea that every confident step he took toward me was a step he was taking without looking down, and the ground beneath him had already changed completely. Richard called me on a Thursday afternoon in the last week of September, and the first thing he said was a name I had not spoken out loud in nearly 15 years. David Morgan, Richard said. Do you remember him? I was standing in the backyard, pulling the last of the summer tomatoes off the vine, the ones that had gone soft and were not going to ripen any further, and I stopped with a tomato in each hand and felt something warm move through my chest. Not sentimentality exactly. More like the feeling of a piece of furniture you had almost forgotten you owned, turning out to be exactly what you needed. I remember him, I said. He is the branch manager at First Pacific on Burnside, Richard said. Has been for 4 years. And Walter, he manages your primary accounts. I set the tomatoes down on the edge of the raised bed and straightened up slowly, one hand pressed to the small of my back. Tell me what you need me to do, I said. We met at the bank on Friday morning, Richard, David, and I, in the private conference room on the second floor that David used for high-value client consultations. It had a glass wall that looked out over the main floor below, and I sat with my back to it and watched David Morgan settle into the chair across from me. He was 34 years old now, with the kind of composed, deliberate manner that good bankers develop early and wear like a second suit. He was dressed in a charcoal jacket and a burgundy tie, and when he reached across the table to shake my hand, his grip was firm, and his eyes were direct and grateful in a way that 15 years had not diminished at all. Mr. Hayes, he said, it is good to see you. I wish the circumstances were different. Davenco. I said, the last time I saw you, you were 20 years old and crying in the back aisle of a hardware store. I think we can drop the formalities. He almost smiled at that, a real one, quick and unguarded, before the professional mask settled back into place. Walter, he said. All right, I had found David Morgan on a Tuesday evening in October 15 years ago, sitting on a stack of drywall in the back aisle of Patterson's Hardware on Division Street, where he worked the night shift to help support his mother after his father left. He had an economics textbook open on his knee and tears running quietly down his face, and when I asked him what was wrong, he told me that he was $2,000 short of his senior year tuition, and the university would not hold his enrollment past the following Friday. I had gone home that night, talked it over with Margaret. She had said, without hesitating, of course, and the next morning I walked back into that hardware store and handed David a certified check from our company account that covered his tuition, his books, and 8 months of rent. He had tried to refuse it. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the envelope. You do not owe me anything back, I had told him. Graduate. Do something honest with it. He had done exactly that. Now he opened a folder on the table between us and began laying documents out with the careful precision of someone who had been preparing for this meeting for several days. I cannot share confidential client information, David said, looking at me steadily. So I want to be precise about what I am able to tell you and how. He paused. What I can tell you is that in the past 6 weeks, an individual has contacted this branch on 2 separate occasions, asking detailed questions about the process for accessing another account holder's funds through power of attorney and about the procedure for transferring real property title into an account holder's name. My hand tightened on the arm of the chair. 2 visits, I said. 2, David confirmed. I was not present for either one, but the staff member who handled both inquiries flagged them for my attention, because the account in question is one I manage personally. He looked at me. Your account, Walter? Richard set his hand flat on the table. Was any action taken on the account? None, David said. No authorizations were provided, no transactions were processed. But there is something else. He reached into the folder and removed a single sheet of paper, turning it to face me across the table. It was a loan application. The letterhead was from a commercial lending company, not First Pacific, but a secondary lender that worked with borrowers who could not qualify through conventional banks. The application listed my home address as the primary collateral asset. It listed my full legal name as the applicant. And at the bottom, on the signature line, was my name. Written in a hand that was not mine, the burn on my palm nearly healed now. Just a tight pink scar across the heel of my hand throbbed once hard like a reminder. That signature, I said, keeping my voice level despite the fact that something cold and furious was moving through me from my chest to my fingertips, is not mine. I know, David said quietly. I have your signature on file across 20 years of documents. That is not it. He paused. Walter, what this person attempted constitutes loan fraud and forgery under both Oregon state law and federal statute. Submitting a falsified signature on a loan application, especially one using another person's property as collateral without their knowledge, carries serious criminal exposure. We are not talking about a civil matter. I picked up the document and looked at the signature for a long moment. The handwriting was close enough that someone who did not know my signature would not question it. But the pressure of the pen was wrong, and the way the letters connected in my first name was not the way my hand had ever moved. I folded the document precisely along its center crease and placed it in the inside pocket of my jacket. I am going to need a copy of this formally certified, I said. Already prepared, David said, sliding a second copy across the table. Notarized with my attestation as branch manager that the signature does not match the account holder's authenticated samples on file. Richard reached over and took the certified copy, tucking it into his briefcase without a word. I looked at David Morgan across the table, at the composed, careful, loyal man he had become, and felt a rush of something that was not quite gratitude and not quite pride, but somewhere between the two. The particular feeling of having once made a decision that turned out to matter in ways you could not have predicted. Thank you, David, I said. He straightened the remaining documents in the folder and closed it with quiet precision. You told me to do something honest, he said. I am still working on it? Derek had already forged my name once. A man who crosses that line once has already decided the line does not apply to him, which meant he was not planning to wait much longer before he came back for the real thing, and this time he would not be asking. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in early October in a silver Lexus that he parked too close to my mailbox, the way people park when they are in a hurry to be somewhere important. I was in the kitchen when I heard the car door, and I watched through the window as he came up the front walk, adjusting his tie with one hand and carrying a clipboard in the other, a tall man with the kind of groomed, angular face that photographs well and listens poorly. He rang the bell with the confident single press of someone who expected the door to open on the first try. I counted to 5 before I opened it. Mr. Hayes. He smiled with his teeth and not his eyes. My name is Dr. Harlan Webb. I am here on behalf of the County Health and Wellness Division to conduct a routine cognitive assessment. Your family has expressed some concerns about your ability to manage independently, and the state takes those concerns seriously. I looked at the clipboard he held toward me. The letterhead read, Multnomah County Adult Protective Services in clean official font. But the paper had the particular brightness of something printed that morning, rather than sourced from an actual government office. The notary stamp in the corner was the wrong shade of blue. I had spent 40 years reading contracts. I knew what a real government document felt like. Of course," I said, stepping back from the door. "Come on in. I was just about to make tea." He followed me into the living room and settled into the chair across from the coffee table with the practiced ease of a man who was used to being received in other people's homes. He set the clipboard on his knee, uncapped a pen, and looked around the room with the assessing sweep of someone cataloging assets rather than checking on a person's well-being. What Dr. Webb could not see, because it was fastened with a strip of industrial adhesive tape to the underside of the coffee table between us, was the digital audio recorder Richard had helped me install the previous evening. It was smaller than a deck of cards and had a battery life of 14 hours. The record button was already pressed. "Let us start with some simple orientation questions," Webb said, clicking his pen with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this many times and found it tedious. "Can you tell me what today's date is, Mr. Hayes?" I furrowed my brow and looked at the wall, then at the window, then back at him with the mild, searching expression of a man consulting a mental filing cabinet that had been rearranged without his knowledge. "It is—" I trailed off, rubbing the back of my hand across my forehead. "Tuesday. I know it is Tuesday because the recycling went out." "And the month August," I said with quiet, dignified confidence. We were 3 weeks into October. Webb wrote something on his clipboard without looking up. "Who is the current governor of Oregon?" I named a man who had been out of office for 11 years. I said his name with the fond certainty of someone referencing a trusted public figure. Webb's pen moved faster. We went on like that for 20 minutes. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I stopped at 79 and told him the numbers were moving around. He asked me to draw a clock showing 10 minutes after 11, and I drew something that resembled a clock, the way a child's drawing resembles architecture, approximate in concept, collapsed in execution. I handed it to him with a small, embarrassed smile, and he received it with the barely concealed satisfaction of a man whose expectations were being met precisely. Then he set the clipboard on the table, leaned back in the chair, and rolled his shoulders the way men do when they believe a job is effectively finished. He had stopped looking at me entirely. I had become, in his estimation, a closed matter. He pulled out his phone and typed a message with his thumb unhurried, the way a man texts when he believes he is alone. He spoke the words quietly as he typed, the habit of someone who had grown careless in rooms where the occupant was not considered a threat. "Mr. Collins was right," he murmured almost to himself, eyes on the screen. "Significant disorientation, temporal confusion, executive function compromised." A small sound that might have been satisfaction. "Easiest 15,000 I have made all year." He pocketed the phone, recapped his pen, and looked up at me with his professional warmth fully restored, as though a switch had been flipped. Every muscle in my body stayed completely still. My face held its expression of vague, tired confusion with the discipline of someone who had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts across tables from people trying to take things from him. Webb stood, smoothed his jacket, and picked up his clipboard. "You will be hearing from the county office within the week, Mr. Hayes," he said, reverting to his official register as automatically as flipping a switch. "We will make sure you are well taken care of." "Thank you for coming," I said. My voice was soft and a little uncertain, the voice of a man who was grateful for the attention. He let himself out. I listened to the Lexus back out of my driveway too fast, the tires chirping slightly on the dry pavement. Then I stood up, reached under the coffee table and peeled the recorder free from its tape mount. I plugged it into my laptop at the kitchen table and put on my reading glasses. The audio file was clean, every word crisp and clear, the room acoustics working in my favor. Webb's voice when he said $15,000 was as vivid as if he were still sitting across from me. I opened my email and attached the file. Richard picked up before the second ring. "Did it work?" "He confessed to the bribery on tape," I said. "Named Derek by name, gave the dollar amount. Called it the easiest money he had made all year." A pause on Richard's end, the particular pause of a man absorbing very good news very carefully. "Walter," he said, "I need you to send me that file right now." "Already sent," I said. $15,000 to declare a man incompetent. Derek had purchased a medical opinion. What he had not understood, what men like Derek never understood, was that the things you buy illegally come with receipts you cannot control. Emily came alone that afternoon. No Derek. That was the first thing I noticed when I heard only one car door close in the driveway, a single soft thud, rather than the paired sequence I had learned to associate with the two of them arriving together. I watched through the kitchen window as she came up the front walk carrying a glass baking dish covered in aluminum foil, and something about the way she moved head slightly down steps, deliberate and rehearsed, told me she had gone over this visit many times in her mind before she got here. I opened the door before she knocked. "Hey, Dad." She smiled, and it was almost her real smile, almost the one she had as a girl, the one that reached all the way to her eyes. "I baked something." She carried the dish to the kitchen and set it on the counter, peeling back the foil to reveal a deep dish apple cobbler, the filling still steaming faintly at the edges. The lattice crust, golden brown and fragrant with cinnamon and nutmeg. My chest pulled tight in a way I had not been prepared for. It was Margaret's recipe. Exactly Margaret's recipe, the particular way the apples were sliced thin and layered, rather than chunked, the smell of brown sugar and a touch of cardamom that Margaret had added one autumn and never taken back out. Emily had stood on a step stool in this kitchen at the age of 7 and watched her mother make this exact cobbler, and the smell of it now hit me somewhere below the level of strategy and calculation, somewhere that was just a man who missed his wife. "You used Mom's recipe," I said. Emily's eyes went a little bright, and she pressed her lips together for a moment before she answered. "I found her recipe card in the tin box last week, the one with her handwriting on it." Her voice caught slightly on the last word. I thought it might be nice. For you." I looked at the cobbler and breathed through the tightness in my chest. "Margaret, I know what this is, but it still hurts." Sit down, sweetheart," I said. "Let me get some plates." "Actually, Dad." She reached into the tote bag she had set on the chair beside her and pulled out a manila folder thicker than a casual document, but thinner than a legal brief. She set it on the kitchen table with a care that was just slightly too deliberate. "I wanted to talk to you about something first, if that is okay." I sat down across from her, let my shoulders curve inward slightly, and folded my hands on the table the way a tired man folds his hands. "What is it, Em?" She opened the folder and slid a multi-page document toward me, smoothing it flat with her palm. A young woman I had not noticed before rose quietly from the chair near the window, a notary brought along to make everything official the moment I signed. She set her stamp on the table without a word and folded her hands. "Derek and I have been talking to a family law specialist. she said, her voice gentle and measured in the way of someone who has memorized a tone. And what we learned is that as things stand right now, if something happened to you, if you got sick or needed care, or couldn't manage things on your own, we would have no legal ability to help you quickly. Everything would go through probate. It could take years and cost a fortune. "Oh, that sounds serious," I said, letting my eyebrows gather with slow, clouded concern. "It is, Dad. So what this document does," she tapped the top page, "is give Derek and me a durable power of attorney. That means if you ever need us to step in, we can act on your behalf. Pay your bills, handle the property, make sure you are taken care of." She paused, her eyes soft and earnest. "It does not take anything away from you. You are still in control of everything. It just means we can help if you need us to." A durable power of attorney in Oregon, when signed and notarized, grants the designated agent broad legal authority over the grantor's financial assets and real property, including the authority to sell, transfer, or encumber that property on the grantor's behalf. It is one of the most powerful legal instruments in estate law, and in the wrong hands, one of the most dangerous. What Emily had placed in front of me was not a limited assistance document. It was a full financial takeover dressed in the language of family care. I leaned forward, squinting at the text, turning the pages slowly with one finger. "My eyes are not what they used to be," I said. "Can you read me the important parts, sweetheart?" She read. She read the parts she wanted me to hear, the words about care and assistance and family, and moved through the operative clauses quickly, her voice staying warm and unhurried. She did not read me the section on page 3 that granted authority to liquidate real property without the grantor's additional consent. I listened to every word she did not say. When she finished, I reached into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt and took out the pen Richard had given me 3 days ago. It looked like an ordinary ballpoint black barrel silver clip, the kind you find in a cup on any office desk. What it contained was a formulation of disappearing ink, a novelty product with a legitimate chemical basis. The ink appeared dark and permanent on contact with paper, but degraded completely upon prolonged exposure to air, typically within 90 to 120 minutes, leaving no trace and no indentation. I clicked the pen. My hand trembled just enough to be convincing. "You really think this will help?" I asked, my voice thin and hopeful. Emily reached across the table and covered my unsteady hand with hers. Her touch was warm, and it cost me something to receive it, knowing what it was attached to. "I really do, Dad," she said softly. "This is just us taking care of you, the way you always took care of us." I pressed the pen to the signature line and signed my full name, Walter James Hayes, in slow, slightly shaky cursive. The ink flowed dark and clean across the paper. Emily pulled the document toward her the moment my pen lifted. She did not wait, did not offer to serve the cobbler, did not ask if I wanted a moment. She folded the pages with quick, practiced efficiency, slid the folder into her tote bag, and was on her feet before I had set the pen down on the table. "I will call you tomorrow, okay?" She leaned down and kissed my forehead, and I felt her exhale a long, slow release of breath, the breath of someone who has been holding tension for a long time and has just been told they can let it go. She was out the front door in under a minute. Her car started, backed out, and was gone. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the apple cobbler still steaming gently on the counter. She had not taken a single piece. She had not even picked up a fork. Margaret had spent 40 years perfecting that recipe. Emily had used it the way you use a tool, efficiently and without sentiment once the job was done. I looked at that cobbler for a long time, and my eyes burned in a way that had nothing to do with the cinnamon. Some performances are so focused on the ending, that the performer forgets to finish the scene. Emily had played her role exactly the way Derek had scripted it. What neither of them had considered was that the ink she had just watched me sign with would not exist by morning. David called at 8:15 the next morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee and the newspaper folded open to the crossword, which I had not actually been working on. I had been sitting there since 6, watching the light change over the backyard, thinking about the apple cobbler that was still on the counter under its aluminum foil, and whether I was ever going to be able to eat a piece of it. When I saw David's name on the screen, I picked up immediately. "Walter," he said. And there was something underneath the professional steadiness of his voice, a particular kind of controlled energy, the kind a man carries when he has just watched something remarkable happen and is working very hard to describe it accurately. "I need to tell you about this morning." "Go ahead," I said. I set my coffee down and folded my hands on the table. He told me everything in sequence, the way a good witness tells a story chronologically, without editorializing with precise details in the places that mattered. As he talked, I found myself building the scene in my mind, as clearly as if I had been sitting in the corner of that glass-walled office watching it unfold. Derek and Emily had walked through the front doors of First Pacific Bank at 9:52, which David knew because the security system time-stamped every entry. Derek had been wearing his charcoal suit, the one he wore when he wanted to project authority, and Emily had been carrying the folder. They had bypassed the teller line entirely and gone straight to the reception desk, where Derek had asked for the branch manager by name. Not by title, by name. David said that detail told him everything he needed to know about how Derek had prepared for this visit. When they were shown into David's office and the door was closed, Derek had not sat down. He had stood at the edge of the desk, one hand resting on the polished surface, and opened the folder with the ease of a man presenting a winning hand. "We need to execute a withdrawal of $250,000 from Walter Hayes's primary savings account." Derek had said, his voice carrying the smooth, unhurried confidence of someone who fully expected compliance. "We have a durable power of attorney signed and notarized authorizing us to act on his behalf." David had reached across the desk, accepted the document, and put on his reading glasses. "I took my time," David told me on the phone, and I could hear the quiet satisfaction in it. "I read every page. I checked the notary stamp against our reference file. I looked at the witness signatures, and then I looked at the signature line." He paused. "What did you see?" I asked, though I already knew. "Nothing," David said. "A perfectly blank line. No ink, no indentation, no trace of any signature whatsoever." Derek's reaction, David told me, had been instantaneous and catastrophic. His face had gone from composed to scarlet in the space of a single breath. He had snatched the document from David's hands and turned it over, held it up toward the window light, pressed his thumb across the signature line as if the ink might reappear under pressure. "That is impossible," Emily had said, her voice pitching upward with a sharp, disbelieving crack. I stood right there and watched him sign it. I watched the pen move. He signed it. Derek had said, his voice shaking now, the polished consultant persona fracturing along every seam. "He signed it in front of both of us. You did something to this paper. You treated it with something." David had received this accusation with the particular stillness of a man who has been a branch manager for 4 years and has heard most things. He had set the document flat on the desk, aligned its edges precisely, and looked at Derek with an expression of measured, professional regret. "Well, Mr. Collins," he had said, "I cannot process a withdrawal against a document with no valid signature. That is not a policy decision. That is basic contract law." He had paused. "However, I do need to inform you that presenting a document to a financial institution and claiming it authorizes access to another person's funds, When that document lacks the required authorization, constitutes an attempt to commit financial fraud under federal statute that carries serious criminal exposure. Emily had made a sound. David described it as something between a gasp and a moan, and pressed her hand flat against her sternum. Derek had pointed his finger at David across the desk, his hand trembling with the effort of containing whatever was moving through him. "I want your supervisor's name," he had said. "I want the corporate complaint number. I am going to have your job by the end of the week." David had reached beneath his desk and pressed the silent security alert with the calm efficiency of someone performing a practiced procedure. Within 90 seconds, 2 members of the bank's security staff had appeared at the office door. "I am going to ask you both to remain here while we complete our documentation of this incident," David had told them. "You are not being detained by law enforcement, but I am obligated to file a fraud attempt report with the Federal Regulatory Authority, and I will need your identification before you leave." Derek had looked at the 2 security guards blocking the doorway, then at David, then at Emily, whose face had gone the color of old chalk. For just a moment, David said just a fraction of a second, Derek's composure had collapsed entirely, and what had shown through was not anger, but something rawer and more honest. Pure animal fear. I sat at my kitchen table and let the full shape of the morning settle around me. "Did they stay?" I asked. "Long enough for me to complete the incident report," David said. "Their identification is on file. The federal fraud attempt notification went to the regulatory authority at 10:41 this morning." A pause. "Walter." They walked out of here looking like 2 people who have just realized the ground is a lot closer than they thought it was. "Thank you, David," I said. After I hung up, I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold while I was on the phone, but I drank it anyway. A cornered animal does not give up when one exit is blocked. It finds another way out, usually louder, usually more desperate, and almost always more destructive. I knew Derek was not done. I was counting on it. Derek did not give up after the bank. I had not expected him to. Men who have spent years constructing an identity around intelligence and control do not accept a single failure as a final answer. They escalate, they recalibrate, they find a new angle. The only question was how long it would take him to find one and how far he was willing to go. The answer was 7 days. And the answer to the second question was further than I had anticipated, even knowing what I knew about him. He called on a Wednesday evening, while I was in the backyard covering the last of the garden beds for the season, tucking old burlap around the rose bushes, the way Margaret had shown me. The screen on my phone lit up against the top of the porch railing, and I looked at his name for 2 full rings before I answered. "Walter." His voice had changed. The smooth consultant's register was gone, replaced by something harder and more exposed. The voice of a man who has spent a week making calls that did not go the way he planned. "I am going to be very direct with you." "I appreciate that," I said. "I have a video from the barbecue," he said. "Security footage. I have had it edited by a professional, and what it shows is you losing your balance and stumbling into the grill. It does not show anything that happened before that. Just you falling and your hand making contact with the metal." A pause, deliberate and calculated. "If I take that video to the Portland Police Bureau and tell them you have been making false accusations against me, you will be investigated for filing a false report. Given your recent cognitive difficulties, I do not think that will go well for you." My hand tightened on the phone. The burlap in my other hand went still. "What do you want, Derek?" I asked, and I let my voice go thin and frightened the way he wanted it to sound. "I want you to sign the house over to Emily and me," he said. "A quit-claim deed. Clean transfer, no conditions. I have already had the paperwork drawn up. You come to my lawyer's office on Friday, you sign the document in front of a notary, and this whole thing ends. No video, no police report, no more of any of this. I sat down on the back porch step and looked out at the garden beds I had just covered. Margaret's roses were wrapped for winter, now protected against the cold. "What more, and if I do not?" I asked. "Then I send the video to every news outlet in Portland by Friday morning," he said. "I tell them a confused elderly man attacked his son-in-law at a family gathering and then fabricated a police report. I tell them about your mental evaluation." His voice tightened. "You will not recover from it, Walter. Sign the deed." I let out a long, slow breath that I made sound like a man deflating. "All right," I said quietly. "Send me the address." The law office was in a strip mall on the east side, a cramped two-room operation wedged between a tax preparation service and a nail salon. The kind of place that handled uncomplicated transactions for clients who could not afford downtown rates. A cheap strip mall lawyer, Richard had said when I told him the address, was exactly the kind of lawyer who would not pull a commercial zoning history on a property before notarizing a transfer. That was precisely what I was counting on. I arrived at 10 Friday morning in my flannel shirt and my old work boots, and Derek was already there, sitting at the conference table with a coffee cup and the posture of a man who had already mentally spent the money he thought he was about to receive. He looked terrible, dark circles carved deep under his eyes, a tension in his jaw that had not been there even 2 weeks ago, but he had his performance ready. He stood when I came in, gestured to the chair across from him like a host receiving a guest. "Walter," he said. "Thank you for coming." I sat down slowly, both hands on the table, and looked at the document the lawyer slid across to me. A quit-claim deed. My name as grantor Derek and Emily Collins as grantees. The property address. The transfer of all rights, title, and interest. Derek leaned forward, and something in him could not resist. Men like Derek always have to say the thing out loud when they believe they have won. They need the moment to mean something. "You know what your problem is, Walter," he said, his voice dropping to something low and contemptuous. "You spent your whole life working with your hands, and you think that makes you something. You think because you built things and carried things and got dirty, you understand how the world works." He shook his head slowly. "You do not. You never did. Men like me, we work with our minds. We move money. We understand leverage. And right now, I am leveraging the only thing you have ever had, which is this house, and there is not a single thing you can do about it." I let his words sit on me the way rain sits on stone. I looked at him across the table, at the expensive watch, at the hollow confidence, at the desperate man underneath all of it, and I felt a profound and particular sorrow that had nothing to do with losing. I picked up the pen the lawyer had set beside the document. This one was not the novelty pen I had used with Emily. This was a standard ballpoint with permanent ink, the kind that would hold on paper for 100 years, and this time it needed to. Richard and I had discussed this moment carefully. The disappearing ink had done its job. It had drawn Derek fully into the open, given us documented evidence of his intent, and bought us the time we needed to prepare the ground beneath him. But this deed needed to be real. A genuine transfer was the only way the commercial liability would attach to him without question. The trap only worked if the transfer was authentic. My hand trembled. Just a little. Just enough. "If I sign this, I said, my voice small and exhausted, "you will leave me alone." Derek's jaw tightened with the effort of keeping the triumph off his face. "Sign the deed, Walter." I pressed the pen to the signature line and signed my full legal name, Walter James Hayes, in slow, deliberate cursive. The notary stamped it before the ink was dry. Derek picked up the document with both hands and held it the way men hold things they have wanted for a long time. His chest rose and fell with something that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. I stood put on my jacket and walked to the door. At the threshold, I stopped, not turning around. "Read the full property disclosure before you do anything with that," I said. "Drive safe, Walter," Derek said behind me. I stepped out into the October sunlight and took a long, clean breath of cold air. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and pressed Richard's name. He answered on the first ring. "It is done," I said. He signed the notarization. The deed transferred at 10:47 this morning. "And," Richard said, "and he did not pull the commercial zoning records," I said. Not a single question about the property history. A beat of silence on Richard's end. The particular silence of a man who has been building towards something for weeks and has just watched the last piece fall into place. "Walter," he said, "he just swallowed the whole thing." I walked to my truck, unlocked it, and got in. The engine turned over on the first try the way it always did. Derek thought the moment I signed that deed was the moment I lost everything. He had no idea that the moment he stamped his name on that document, he had just agreed to carry something that would take him the rest of his life to put down if he ever could. I stood on the sidewalk across the street from my own house and watched a locksmith drill out the deadbolts I had installed myself in the summer of 2001. Richard had told me to stay away. I had told him I needed to see it not out of grief, but out of certainty. A man should witness the moment his plan arrives at the place it was always going. I needed to see Derek standing in that doorway believing he had won, so I would know, without any doubt, that the trap had fully closed. The man worked efficiently, his van parked half on the lawn, his drill sending small curls of brass onto the front porch. I had hung that door myself. I had mortised the hinges by hand, with a chisel Margaret had given me for our anniversary, because she said a man who built things deserved proper tools. I watched without moving from the sidewalk. My hands were in my jacket pockets, and my face was composed, and my heart rate was exactly what it always was. There was no grief in what I felt standing there. Only the particular satisfaction of watching a plan arrive at the moment it was designed for. Derek appeared in the doorway, watching the locksmith work with the proprietary energy of a man taking inventory of something he has just acquired. He did not look across the street. He was already inside the story he had written for himself, the one where the stubborn old man had finally been outmaneuvered, where the house was his, where everything was going to be fine. Then a dark SUV with government plates turned onto the street and parked in front of my driveway. Two people in business attire stepped out, a man and a woman, both carrying document folders, both wearing the particular expression of people who have arrived to deliver information rather than to negotiate. They walked up the front path, and this woman knocked on the door with 3 firm, unhurried knocks. I watched Derek open the door. I watched him receive the documents they held out. I watched his head drop to read the first page, then come back up, then drop again. Even from across the street, I could see the color drain from his face the way color drains from something when the heat underneath it is suddenly removed. I turned, walked to my car, and drove to Richard's office. Richard had the folder waiting on his desk when I arrived. He stood when I came in, which he rarely did, and gestured to the chair across from him with a seriousness that told me he wanted me to be sitting down for this part. "Let me explain what Derek just received," Richard said, opening the folder and turning it so I could see the documents. "And I want to be precise because the legal mechanism here is specific." "Go ahead," I said. 12 years ago, when the company was operating at full scale across 3 states, you needed a centralized location to temporarily stage industrial materials before transport commercial-grade solvents, treatment compounds, the kind of substances that go into large-scale infrastructure work. Richard tapped the first document. Working with the county and the state, we registered the residential address as a commercial auxiliary transit point under Oregon's Business Property Code. It was fully permitted, fully documented, and tied directly to the corporate entity. And that registration, I said, stayed on the property. It never left, Richard said. A commercial auxiliary designation under Oregon Code is attached to the physical address, not to the ownership entity. When Derek accepted direct transfer of that deed outside the corporate trust umbrella, he did not just acquire the real estate equity. Richard's finger moved to the second document. He assumed personal unshielded liability for every commercial obligation attached to that address. That includes the outstanding commercial transition fees, the mandatory state audit for change of use classification, and the delinquent commercial reporting penalties that have been accruing since the company reduced operations at that site. How much? I asked. Richard turned to the last page of the folder. The number was printed at the bottom in a standard government invoice format, clean, official, inescapable. $890,000, payable to the Oregon Department of Revenue Commercial Property Division within 45 days of ownership transfer. Non-dischargeable under federal bankruptcy statute because it constituted a commercial regulatory debt rather than a consumer obligation. I looked at that number for a long moment. Then I looked up at Richard. He cannot sell the house to pay it, I said. Because the commercial designation freezes the transfer until the debt is cleared. Correct, Richard said. He cannot sell it, he cannot refinance it, and he cannot walk away from it. The debt follows the deed. He folded his hands on the desk. Derek Collins accepted a house worth $1.5 million and simultaneously accepted a regulatory liability of nearly $900,000. He is at this moment the owner of a property that is worth less than what he owes on it, and he has no legal mechanism to escape that position. The office was quiet. Through the window behind Richard, the October sky was the particular flat gray of a Portland afternoon that has decided not to commit to rain. He went to a strip mall lawyer, I said, who charged him $800 and did not pull the commercial zoning history, Richard said. Because a competent real estate attorney would have found the auxiliary designation in the first title search and refused to proceed without a corporate liability release. He paused. Derek was in too much of a hurry to be careful, and he was too certain he was smarter than you to check what he was stepping into. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and picked up my hat from the edge of his desk. Thank you, Richard, I said. He looked at me with something steady and warm in his expression. Margaret would have loved this part, he said quietly. I smiled at that, a real one. She would have had the whole thing planned out by the second visit, I said. Derek Collins had spent months trying to take a house worth $1.5 million. What he had actually taken was a liability worth nearly $900,000. The distance between those two numbers was the entire rest of his life. I was sitting on the back porch of the lake house when my phone rang at 7:12 in the morning. The lake house was 40 minutes outside Portland, on a private lot that Margaret and I had purchased 22 years ago under the corporate trust, a separate asset held in a separate entity, never connected to the residential address Derek had spent months trying to take. He had never known it existed. The morning I signed that deed, I had already moved everything that mattered out of the house on Hawthorne and brought it here. As far as he knew, the house he had just drilled new locks into was the only home I had ever owned. The surface of the lake that morning was perfectly still, a sheet of gray-green glass reflecting the October sky. A heron stood motionless in the shallows near the dock, waiting with the infinite patience of a creature that understood time differently than men did. I looked at Derek's name on my phone screen. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered, Walter. His voice was unrecognizable. The consultant's polish, the measured confidence, the practiced warmth. All of it was gone, stripped away the way a storm strips paint, leaving something raw and structural and ugly underneath. His breathing was ragged and too fast. "Walter, you set me up." "Good morning, Derek," I said. "Do not good morning me." His voice cracked on the last word, splitting between rage and something much closer to tears. "They froze the property. The state came and froze the entire property. I cannot sell it. I cannot touch it. I cannot do anything with it because of some commercial designation you buried in the deed 30 years ago." 12 years ago, I said. "And it was not buried. It is in the public record. Any title search would have found it in under an hour. You knew." The word came out broken and accusing and desperate all at once. "You knew about this, and you let me take it. You handed me a trap." "I handed you exactly what you asked for," I said. My voice was very calm, the way it got when I was certain of something, all the way down to the bone. "You drafted the deed. You brought your lawyer. You chose the location. You threatened me with a fabricated video to make me sign. I simply signed what you put in front of me." A sound came through the phone that was not quite a sob and not quite a shout. Something between the two. The sound of a man whose constructed reality has just collapsed onto him. I heard his breathing labor in and out, ragged and wet. $890,000. He said, his voice dropping to a hollow whisper. "Walter, I do not have that. I do not have a fraction of that. You know I do not have that." "I do know," I said. "Shall then undo it." His tone shifted, turning frantic, the words tumbling over each other. "Call the county office. Call Richard. Tell them it was a mistake, that you want the deed reversed. I will sign whatever you need me to sign. I will delete the video. I will go to the police and tell them the barbecue was an accident. I will leave you alone, Walter. I swear to God I will never contact you again." I looked out at the heron in the shallows. It had not moved. I said, "There is something I want you to know. 12 years ago, when you were a junior analyst with a failed fund and $40,000 in debt, a private investment entity provided $2 million in seed capital that allowed you to launch your firm. You told Emily it was an anonymous angel investor who saw your potential." The line went very quiet on his end, the kind of quiet that has weight in it. "That investment entity," I said, "was a blind trust funded entirely by Margaret and me. We invested in you because Emily loved you, and because we genuinely believed that you might become a man worth loving back. We gave you the foundation, and you used it to build a lie, and then you used that lie to try to take the house that Margaret's hands helped build." A long, terrible sound came through the phone. Derek was crying, not the controlled, strategic tears of a man performing emotion, but something uglier and more honest. The crying of someone who has just understood the full dimension of what they have done and what it has cost them. "I did not know," he said, his voice destroyed. "I did not know it was you." "I know you did not," I said. "That is the saddest part of it." I ended the call and set the phone face down on the porch railing. The heron lifted from the shallows in one long, unhurried motion and crossed the water without a sound. Richard's text arrived 40 seconds later. "FBI Financial Crimes has opened a formal investigation. Forgery and fraud charges incoming. It is over, Walter." I picked up my coffee mug and held it in both hands, feeling the warmth spread across my palms, across the scar on my right hand, where the grill rail had burned me on a September evening that felt like a very long time ago. Somewhere across the city, Derek Collins was sitting in the house he had stolen from me, finally understanding that he had never been playing against an old man. He had been playing against the man who built him, and he had never even known the game had rules. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way people imagine justice to be. There were no explosions, no public confessions on courthouse steps. Just the slow, grinding machinery of federal law doing what it was built to do, and a woman who finally stopped looking the other way. Richard called me on a Tuesday evening in early November, and his voice had that particular quality it carried when he was reporting facts he found both satisfying and sad. "When Derek cooperated with the FBI this morning," he said. "He gave them a full statement." "What did he say?" I asked. "So he said Emily planned everything," Richard said. "He told the investigators she pressured him into the property scheme, that she controlled their finances, that he was simply a devoted husband, doing what his wife demanded. He described her as the primary architect of the fraud from the beginning." A pause. "He is trying to negotiate a reduced sentence by giving them a co-conspirator." My chest tightened. Not with surprise. With the particular grief of watching a prediction come true that you had hoped would not. "Does Emily know?" I asked. "She was shown his statement this afternoon," Richard said. "The investigator told me she read the whole thing without making a sound. Then she asked for a glass of water and sat there holding it without drinking for about 4 minutes. I thought about Emily reading her husband's words, reading the way he had described her, the way he had taken 11 years of marriage and reduced it to a legal instrument for his own survival. I thought about the moment she had understood fully and finally that the man she had defended against her bleeding father was willing to send her to federal prison to save himself 2 years. She called me an hour later," Richard continued. "She did not call a defense attorney. She called me. She asked me to tell her the truth about you, all of it. The company, the trust, the investment we made in Derek 12 years ago." His voice softened just slightly. "I told her everything, Walter. I thought you would want me to." "You were right," I said. "She did not cry," Richard said. "She just kept saying, 'I remember exactly.' She kept saying, 'I did not know. I did not know who he was.' And then she said, 'I did not know who my father was either.'" I set my coffee down on the porch railing and looked out at the lake. The surface was dark and still under the November sky, and the heron was gone for the season. "Where is she now?" I asked. "That is why I am calling," Richard said. "She drove to your gate about 20 minutes ago. She has been standing outside it ever since. She did not buzz the intercom. She is just standing there." I walked inside, pulled up the security feed on my tablet, and found the camera covering the front gate. Emily stood on the other side of the iron bars in the light rain, her coat dark with moisture, her hair loose and damp against her face. She was not performing. She was not rehearsing anything. She was just a woman standing in the rain outside a gate with nowhere else she knew to go. I remembered what Margaret had whispered to me once near the very end, when I had told her I was afraid of becoming too hard. "Don't let your pride mistake their growth for weakness either, Walter." I set the tablet down. I put on my jacket. I had built walls strong enough to keep out everything Derek threw at me. Walking toward that gate, I wondered if I had built them strong enough to survive what was waiting on the other side. December came in quietly, the way endings usually do, not with a crash or a final confrontation, but with a stillness that settles over everything after the noise has moved on and taken what it was going to take. Richard's text arrived on a Tuesday morning, while I was sitting on the cedar deck with my coffee and a newspaper I had not actually been reading. I had been watching the thin line of ice that had formed overnight along the edge of the dock, the way it caught the pale morning light and held it. The message read, 4 years, federal. Full asset forfeiture. 890,000 in commercial debt remains attached to the property. The firm is dissolved. It is done, Walter. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the side table and picked up my coffee with both hands and held it the way you hold something warm when the air around you is cold. Derek Collins was going to a federal corrections facility for 4 years. The house he had drilled new locks into was frozen under a commercial regulatory liability he could never discharge through bankruptcy. The BMW, the penthouse, the tailored suits, the expensive watch he used to adjust before shaking my hand, all of it gone. Repossessed, forfeited, seized by the mechanisms of a legal system he had believed he understood better than an old plumber from Tennessee. I sat with that for a while. I did not feel triumph. I felt the particular quiet of a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Emily arrived at 2 in the afternoon. I heard her car on the gravel drive before I saw her, and I was standing on the front steps when she came around the corner of the path. She was wearing a dark coat I did not recognize, something plain and practical, nothing like the carefully chosen clothes she used to wear when she and Derek visited together. Her hair was loose. Her face was pale and open in a way it had not been in years, stripped of the social armor she had spent a decade building. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at me, and her chin trembled so hard she had to press her lips together to keep from breaking apart right there on the path. Dad. Her voice came out in pieces, the words splitting under the weight of everything attached to it. I do not know how to start. Start with what is true, I said. That is always enough. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment, her shoulders shaking. Then she pulled in a breath that rattled on its way in and looked at me with her mother's eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted, and finally honest. I am sorry, she said, and her voice broke fully on the last word, tears spilling down her face faster than she could wipe them away. I am sorry for every single thing, Dad. For not asking if you were okay when your hand was burning. For standing there in front of all those people and calling you selfish when you were bleeding. She pressed both palms flat against her chest, like she was trying to hold something together from the inside. For choosing him. Over and over every single time I chose him over you. And you never stopped being my father. Not once. My throat tightened in a way I had not expected, and my eyes burned at the corners, and I let them burn because some things are worth feeling all the way through. I walked down the 2 steps between us and stood in front of my daughter and looked at her the way I had not allowed myself to look at her in months. Not as an adversary, not as a disappointment, but as the child Margaret and I had brought home from the hospital 39 years ago, the one who used to fall asleep in the truck on the way home from job sites with her head against my arm. I forgive you, Emily, I said. All of it. Completely. She made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a word. Something that came from a place below language, and her knees buckled slightly before she caught herself, one hand gripping the porch railing. I reached out and steadied her elbow, and she grabbed my forearm with both hands and held on the way people hold on when they have been underwater for a long time. We stood like that for a moment, and I felt the weight of the last 4 months move between us and begin very slowly to change shape. Then I stepped back because there was something else she needed to hear. But Emily, I said gently, forgiveness is not the same as going back. What we had before that cannot be the destination. You need to build something real now, not with my money, not standing behind another person's identity. I looked at her steadily. With your own hands, the way your mother did, the way I did, from the ground up, one honest day at a time. She nodded, wiping her face with the sleeve of her coat, her breath still uneven, but her eyes clearer than they had been when she arrived. She turned to go, and at the top of the path she stopped and looked back at me one last time. Her chin was up, her eyes were red and wet, but her voice when it came was steady. "Mom would be so proud of you," she said. I watched her walk to her car. I did not call after her. I did not move from the steps until her taillights had disappeared around the bend in the drive. Then I went inside, opened the bottom kitchen drawer, and took out the manila envelope for the last time. I carried it to the cedar deck and sat in my chair, the one that faced the water, and opened it in the cold December air. Margaret's handwriting covered 3 pages, steady and unhurried, the way she did everything that mattered. I read every word. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully along its original creases and held it against my chest. My eyes closed, the lake perfectly still below me. She had written, "The measure of a man is not what he builds, Walter. It is what he refuses to let be taken from him. Not the house, not the money, his dignity. Yours has never left you. Not once. I have always known that. I always will." I opened my eyes. The pale December light lay flat and clean across the water. I smiled, not the cold, calculated smile of a plan arriving at its conclusion, but the quiet, unguarded smile of a man who had kept his promise to the person who had always believed in him most. And that, I think, was enough. There is something I have learned from all of this. Something I wish I had understood sooner, before the burned hand and the forged signatures and the long nights sitting alone in a kitchen that used to hold 2 people. I was a revenge dad who waited too long to act. I told myself that patience was wisdom and silence was strength. But the truth is, I confused endurance with acceptance. I let the people I loved most mistake my quiet for surrender, and that silence cost us years we cannot get back. Do not make my mistake. Do not wait until someone puts your hand on a hot grill before you decide your dignity is worth defending. Family justice does not always come loudly. Sometimes it comes in the form of a quiet decision made alone to stop allowing the people who love your assets more than they love you to define what your life is worth. I believe, and I have believed this since Margaret first held my hand in that hospital room and told me she was not afraid, that God does not reward the loudest voice in the room. He rewards the one who stays standing when everything is trying to make them fall. This was my story. A story about family justice earned slowly, built carefully, and delivered without a single word of anger. And if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone you need to protect, that is not a coincidence. If this story reached something in, you leave a comment below and tell me what you felt. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that family justice and truth always find their way home, subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories coming that I think you will want to hear. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than you know. And one more thing. The stories on this channel, including this one, are works of fiction crafted for revenge dad storytelling and educational purposes. Some details have been fictionalized. If the themes here are not for you, no hard feelings, find the content that fits your world. But if you are still here, I am glad you stayed.